Growing up in a family of leaders, it didn't take me long to become one myself. One of the earliest leadership experiences I can remember happened when I was in the 4th grade. In a bizarre accident, my foot was run over by a car. Now, thanks to what have proven through my life to be very strong bones, nothing was broken, but I suffered a severe ankle sprain which required the use of crutches. And this sidelined me from my dance class just as we started preparing for our spring recital. I spent several weeks going to class just to observe, hoping to at least partially learn the recital routines. And once I had the green light to ditch those crutches and start dancing again, I soon reclaimed my spot in the center front of our formation. And that's where the leadership lesson occurred. You see, prior to my accident, other students in the class had looked to me if they forgot a step or lost their place. They recognized my knowledge, hard work, and confidence as markers of leadership, even without a title, and they followed accordingly. But in my absence, they sought out another leader on whom they thought they could rely. That person had confidence, but not the same level of competence. And the result showed all over my face during the recital when she and her followers deviated from the choreography. This experience, in which I learned how leaders can rise and fall, helped set the stage for the leader I was to become. In the nearly 35 years since, I have practiced and studied leadership in a variety of capacities. Academically, by observing the actions and inaction of others, and through my own professional experience as a teacher, mentor, and administrator. I've seen effective leadership build teams, achieve goals, and solve problems. And I've seen the lack of leadership destroy workplaces and damage people's lives. So when I consider how we can solve complex problems, or an even better solution, prevent them from developing in the first place, I keep returning to the solution of effective leadership. Certainly, leadership as a solution is not new. There are voluminous examples of strong, courageous leadership throughout the annals of time. But when a recent Gallup poll found current trust in political leaders to be 13 points below where it was just 2 months before Watergate, we may need a boost in our collective leadership capacity. So tonight, I want to invite you into my leadership classroom for a lesson on what I consider to be the foundational concepts of effective leadership. 1, leaders and titles are not mutually inclusive. 2, courage is key. And 3, leadership is not nearly as complex as some might think. Ready? Let's go. First, I want you to understand that you don't need a title to be a leader any more than having a title makes you one. It's true, people tend to listen to and even obey those in positions of authority. But if they do it simply out of fear of reprisal, they aren't being led, they're being controlled. And titles certainly don't protect against leaders shirking responsibility and expecting others to do the heavy lifting. Now, I can think of no clearer example of the differential between leaders and titles than the recent case of abuse by Larry Nassar. If you're unfamiliar with the story, Nassar was a sports medicine physician for both Michigan State University and USA Gymnastics who, under the guise of legitimate medical treatment, sexually abused and assaulted nearly 500 young women. During his 20-year career, more than a dozen people with titles and the accompanying authority in both organizations were warned about his abuse, and yet none of them took any action that would ultimately bring him to justice. Rather than demonstrating leadership, they abdicated responsibility, allowing a predator to continue his evil and depraved actions for 2 decades. Interestingly, the true leadership in this situation came from an army of survivors of his abuse who spoke out publicly about their experiences, all without the protection or power that come from holding a position of authority. This leadership began with Rachel Den Hollander, who, after reading an Indianapolis Star investigative report on USA Gymnastics' cover-up of abuse by coaches, contacted the paper and told of Nassar's abuse of her more than 10 years prior. She did this knowing that justice would be difficult to come by and would require significant personal sacrifice. Yet she did it as she told the Indy Star, to give a voice to others who have also been victims and encourage them to come forward as well. And come forward they did. After Den Hollander filed a criminal report and the case was assigned to a victim-centered detective and prosecutor, additional people shared their stories, and the evidence was enough to convince Nassar to plead guilty to 7 counts of sexual assault of minors and attend a sentencing trial in which survivors could deliver victim impact statements. 156 victims or their representatives spoke at that hearing, with Den Hollander delivering the final statement, and Judge Rosemarie Aquilina declaring her the 5-star general of that army of survivors. In the sentence Aquilina handed down, assuring Nassar would spend the rest of his life in prison, justice was finally and monumentally served, thanks largely to the untitled leadership of Den Hollander and her sister survivors. So my first lesson tonight is that you can lead from anywhere. No title necessary. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that without a position, you are unable to lead. Not only can you, the world needs you to. Further, holding a leadership position does not instantly make you into a good leader. But if you accept a leadership role, you then have a moral obligation to become the best leader you can be. For when it comes time to solve problems, simply holding a title is not enough. Now, there are a plethora of theories and studies that have attempted to define great leadership and provide a template for people to follow in developing their leadership acumen. But as James McGregor Burns, considered the founder of the field of leadership studies, wrote in 1978, leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena on Earth. Unless you think we've resolved this in the past 40 years, just search leadership in books on Amazon, and you'll find that there are more than 70,000 titles to purchase. If you don't have time for that much reading, you can turn to Google and search qualities of good leaders, where you'll find a variety of lists to consider. A text analysis of the first 20 sites in this search reveals some consistency, with communication, confidence, and being inspirational as the most frequently mentioned traits. But there's one that isn't mentioned nearly enough, in my estimation, and that is courage. Now, I'm not certain why this is, but I do have a theory. Often when we hear the word courage, we think of it in a physical sense, like when a warrior enters combat, or when Ralphie punched back at that bully Scut Farkus in A Christmas Story. Thankfully, most of us will never need to exercise physical courage in our daily work, nor will we need to exhibit the level of emotional courage we saw from Rachel Den Hollander and her sister survivors when they called out Larry Nassar. But even when our leadership is not challenged with catastrophe, courage is essential to its success. There are a multitude of ways to demonstrate courage in leadership, and therefore a multitude of problems it can solve. We can create innovative environments in which people are encouraged to seek out solutions by having the courage to challenge the status quo. We can empower others to be trailblazers when we model the courage to risk failure. And we can avoid groupthink and perpetuating biases when we have the courage to think for ourselves. But ultimately, we can have the greatest impact as leaders when we have the courage to be authentic and true to our values. In the Harvard Business Review article, Discovering Your Authentic Leadership, the authors emphasize that authenticity is the basis of people's trust in a leader. They argue that in knowing who they are, authentic leaders are able to establish long-term and meaningful relationships that lead to results. Sounds great, doesn't it? So then why does it require courage to be authentic? Because your authentic self isn't for everyone. There have been times when my authentic self, the English and chemistry teaching, speaking up with passion, refusing to accept limitations self, has made people uneasy and even angry. I've found that there are people who would like to silence me and stand in my way because an educated, outspoken woman is just a little too much for them to handle. And there have been times when I could have chosen to conform to those expectations rather than be true to myself, which probably would have made my life easier. But ultimately, I chose to be courageous in my authenticity because the way I see it, I am the only person I will spend my entire life with. So I have to be satisfied with myself above all else. One more thing about the courage to be authentic. Leaders aren't perfect. We are human. And therefore, as a friend and colleague often reminds me, we are tragically flawed. I've made many mistakes as a leader that I regret. I've lost my cool and said things that I immediately wished I hadn't. I've created confusion and hard feelings by not sharing information with the right people at the right time. And I've let pride direct my actions more times than I'm proud to admit. And from these mistakes, I've learned the importance of having the courage to say, I was wrong. When leaders fail, we undermine our leadership, but we have a choice. We can courageously own up to our frailties and make amends, or we can refuse to acknowledge our shortcomings, continue to degrade our ability to lead, and ultimately end up having to rely on authority and power instead of leadership to get things done, which is a huge problem in and of itself. So when you're tempted to put your image over your authentic self, call on your courage to own everything about yourself as a leader, mistakes and all. Finally, while our problems may be complicated, the leadership necessary to solve them doesn't have to be. My brother, who is an exceptional leader in his own right, often says of leadership, it isn't easy, but it is simple. And the power of the simple things is the third leadership lesson I want to share with you tonight. Many people seem to believe that the difficulty of leadership is in making the tough decisions, such as when a supervisor has to fire someone. Those situations are indeed difficult and definitely require the trait of courage. But in my experience, if your leadership is consistently centered simply on doing what is right for those you lead, not what is easy, feels good, is best for you personally, will win you the most accolades, but what is right, the necessary decisions are usually pretty obvious. That doesn't mean you enjoy executing them, but it really isn't that difficult to know what action needs to be taken. To me, the hard part of leadership comes in the day-to-day work, being consistent and authentic, clearly communicating expectations, providing support, embodying the vision, and maintaining the standard. Those actions aren't complicated, but they are difficult because they take constant attention and energy. And these are the things I have learned that can have the greatest impact on those you lead. One summer evening, about 16 years ago, my husband and I sat on our back porch, reminiscing about our high school years, including memories of our teachers. Thinking about my own classroom at the time, I realized then that some of the things we remembered so well as students probably went completely unnoticed by our teachers. We talked about how someday some of our former students might reminisce about us in the same way. And it struck me then that what is so simultaneously thrilling and terrifying about being a teacher is that you can have a profound and memorable effect on someone with an action that you may have no memory of. And the same is true about leaders. Recently, I made a post on Facebook about my thoughts on leadership, and a friend I knew from Marshall's Marching Thunder, which I served as drum major as an undergraduate, shared a memory he had of me. We were on a band trip, and just before the director was getting ready to dismiss the group, I asked to establish when and where we were to reassemble. A pretty simple question to ask. My friend remembered my leadership in this moment and how much he appreciated having clear expectations to operate under. Since I have no recollection of this whatsoever, it served as a great reminder of how executing the simple, little things can resolve issues and how profoundly those things can affect the people we lead. So no, leadership is not easy. It is incredibly hard work, but it is truly as simple as attending to the little things and always doing what is right. In January 1945, First Sergeant Carwood Lipton, native of Huntington and later graduate of Marshall College, was in the Belgian woods outside of Foy, in the middle of what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. His company was led by Lieutenant Dyke, a replacement sent from division headquarters, whose inaction in combat made Sergeant Lipton fear for the safety of his fellow soldiers. So in a demonstration of disregarding title and risking disciplinary actions for circumventing the chain of command in order to do what he believed was right, Lipton approached the battalion XO, Captain Dick Winters, and shared his observations. He ended his report to Captain Winters by saying, "Lieutenant Dyke is going to get a lot of E Company men killed." Now, Winters' hands were tied. He couldn't pull Dyke from command. But fortunately, Lipton's leadership extended well past his words. And when Dyke froze in the middle of a firefight, Lipton's courageous actions helped salvage the mission and save lives, earning him a battlefield promotion. He led from where he was with courage and the commitment to doing what was right over what was easy. When we hear stories like those of Rachel Den Hollander and Carwood Lipton, it's easy to think that leadership is something someone either has or they don't. But I do not for 1 minute believe that leaders are born. Leaders are made. They are made every day in the crucible of the choices we make. Because you may not always have control, but you almost always have a choice. And it's in choice, not control, that you demonstrate your strength. So when we choose to lead rather than shirk responsibility, when we choose to ignore fear and risk and let our courage guide our actions, when we choose to do what is right over what is easy or convenient, that's when we become the leaders who can prevent and solve problems. And that is my challenge to you. Lead simply and courageously from where you are, and the difference you make will be lasting, powerful, and memorable. Thank you.